Hi, this is Justin Coletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today we're going to be answering another audience question. This one that came in with the very provocative title, Does My Song Even Need to Be Mastered? And this was with a capital need. I'm not putting it in there. This was from a viewer, reader, listener named Nick. And it's a great question, interesting one. And I think there's a lot of insights we can glean from it. So let's just jump right into the question. Nick writes, Hey, Justin, I'm a big fan of the SonicScoop podcast, and I've been listening for about a year now. All of your information is fantastic and made me a better mixing engineer. That is awesome. That is exactly what I want to hear. I come with a question that you probably get a lot. And I do get something like this with some frequency. He says, I just produced a song and mixed it fairly well. And afterwards, I ran it through some mastering websites, LANDR, SoundCloud. When I heard the master preview, it sounded almost exactly the same when the levels were matched perfectly. Do I even need to master the song if it makes almost no difference? Here's a WAV file of the song so you can check it out. Also, if you have any constructive criticism about the song, please don't hesitate to give me the most brutal and honest feedback. Thanks. All right, Nick, it's not my style to be brutal, but I'll give you, I think, what you need to hear and what's going to be beneficial to you. I usually don't have time to listen to every song that comes in unless I'm doing a coaching call or I'm doing a mastering session for somebody, but with all of the compliments that Nick loaded this with and with the great title, subject line he put in, I did end up listening to it. And let me give you my ideas on this. First of all, LANDR, SoundCloud, these automatic mastering services, are they any good? Are they worth it? Is his experience a common one where it sounds almost exactly the same after mastering? Would mastering with a real person change that at all? Is it going to be markedly better in any way? Like, what's the difference? And are there some songs in some contexts that maybe just don't need mastering? That is a great set of questions. So we're going to go into all that and a lot more in mere moments here. Before I do, the briefest of shout outs to the sponsors on this podcast. This week, who do we have sponsoring? We have got FabFilter sponsoring this month. They just came out with their newest version of their Timeless Delay, Timeless 3. I recently did a whole mastering session using nothing but FabFilter plugins, and stuff actually turned out pretty awesome. I'll link to that here in the show notes. Also, Sound Toys sponsoring once again. They make some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. We got two of the best plugin companies out there sponsoring this week, which is awesome. Try out anything they make for free at soundtoys.com. Also try out the FabFilter stuff for free over at fabfilter.com. Last but not least, JZ microphones. I'm talking into a wonderful JZ Vintage 67 right now. I've been using JZ mics on the podcast and in my videos for over a year now, and they're having a huge sale where you can get mics like this for up to 60% off, plus free shipping if you use the special code SonicScoop. But you got to act now because that summer sale is ending on June 29th. All right, let's get into it. Nick, does your song even need to get mastered? You put it through LANDR, you put it through SoundCloud, it sounds practically the same afterwards. What's the point? And also give me feedback on my mix. All right, I have experienced similar things with LANDR and SoundCloud, where I've heard other people's mixes run through them. When I hear really good mixes run through them, they sound, in my experience, pretty much like the mix, but slightly less good. And then you usually don't really have the option too much to actually change it. Like, which direction do we want to go in? Which is a big thing. And this is something that not many automatic mastering services have, which is the idea of context, genre, like what's the feel we're going for. And one of the big things about mastering that's super important to recognize is there's no one right way to master a track. You could master a track reasonably well in a variety of different ways. And I've sometimes done this for clients. First time I'm working with a client, and I'll get a feel for some of their favorite records, get in my ear, listen to them, listen to their track, and be like, well, we've never worked together before. Here's the direction I think it needs to go, listening to your track and listening to some of the tracks you love. Send it back to them and say, here's a place where I think it sounds really good. However, since you're not here in the studio with me listening to other options, I'm going to send you one, and maybe in some cases, two additional versions, just in case. Here's what it would sound like if we mastered it darker, but also went kind of just as well balanced, but in a darker direction. And here's what we do if we backed off on the processing a bit and went a lot flatter, or the opposite. Here's what we really pushed it, balls to the walls, went really hot, really hyped it up. And I can get it to these 2 or 3 maybe different sounding places, all of which will sound awesome in their own way. But it really comes down to the aesthetic universe that the artist wants the song to sit in. And this is one of the problems with the automatic mastering services that are out there now. I'm hopeful that in the future, there will be automatic mastering services that go beyond this and give you more options, more flexibility. But I've actually heard some examples of this in the past. I'm going to link you to right here. A past contributor to SonicScoop, Jason Moss, who ran the website Behind the Speakers. He's a great mixing engineer in his own right. He's written a bunch of articles for SonicScoop. He did this thing on his own channel where he compared a track that he had mixed, going through LANDR and going through a couple other automatic mastering services, and then also going to a professional mastering engineer. And his mix was great to begin with. It was one of those mixes that sounded good right out of the gate and sounded close to finished or mastered. Like it didn't necessarily need mastering. But when it came back through LANDR and some of the other automatic mastering services, it generally sounded pretty similar to his original mix, but a little bit worse. But the human mastering engineer took it in a different direction and went significantly brighter and wider with his mix in a way that was awesome and I think stood up a lot better to some of the commercial releases in that style. And I'll link to that so you can hear his track mastered in a few different ways. And the one that really stood apart was the human mastering engineer because he made a creative decision, which was, I think the track needs to go in this direction. It's not the only direction it could go, but if it went in this direction, I think it would be super cool. And I think he was right. He could have also been wrong, but in this case, I think he was totally right, and his master, in my opinion, level match wins because it was the most interesting. So that, I think, is the primary benefit to getting your stuff mastered. Isn't just like bringing up the level and isn't just the QC. Like that's part of it. I think the biggest part of the mastering engineer's job who's helping you is the independent third-party QC, where we're double checking things for like what you might consider technical errors, like there's some overabundant frequency in the low end or some overabundant resonant frequency in the high end, and we're trying to smooth those things out. But there's also that creative side of it, of taking the context of the whole library of recorded music that's out there and figuring out how your song's supposed to sit. So when I wrote back to Nick, I said to him, hey man, the track sounds pretty good as is, and I totally get that experience of it coming back from one of these services sounding basically the same but louder. That's kind of what they're supposed to do if your mix already sounds right. Like they're not trying to ruin it. They're trying to get to the right level. And if you have way too much bass or way too much treble, they're trying to reel that in a bit. And they do fine at that. But listening to your track, like if I listen to other tracks in the style, it's kind of electronica style, it's way darker than like all of the major hit kind of things in that style. So if that's the feel that you're going for, and those are the records you want to be heard next to, neither his version nor the mastered version had that kind of excitement and clarity and energy that a lot of the top tracks in the style do. But on the other hand, if that's not what he was going for, and he was going for a slightly more, esoteric, like alternative electronic feel, like a little bit more in the direction of a band called Caribou, it's like one of my favorite electronic artists, and like if he was going for that feel, then it is an appropriate level of darkness. Then like that kind of muted top end and the slightly more mid-rangey feel totally works if like that's the kind of world we're trying to fit in. So that's a question. And that's a question that I ask my clients. And it's a question that, unfortunately LANDR and the SoundCloud mastering service isn't going to ask. So that's a big thing to know. But one of the other things that I noticed is that Nick's mix, totally competent. Good overall job, a lot of nice balances. There was one problem in it for me where the kick drum was overly dominant, again, compared to anything, whether it's this more alternative, esoteric electronic style or this amped up electronic style. The kick was just really dominant, really bottom heavy, really big, and totally taking over. And that's something he probably couldn't hear properly in his own studio. When he got the kick to a place where it felt right to him, it ends up in other environments feeling out of step with major releases that he might love the sound of. So that's the other thing that a mastering engineer might look for. In this case, I'd be going and doing one of two things. One, trying to do processing to control that kick a little bit more, whether it's EQ or dynamic EQ, are going to be the most likely tools. It could be multiband compression to help contain that kick a little bit more and bring some of those other elements out. So we have this totally more rich kind of immersive environment where it's not just like kick and then a whole bunch of other decently balanced stuff below it being totally dominated. And that's one of the changes I would try to make. But even if I couldn't do the ideal job of getting there, I could at least give Nick the feedback of, hey, one thing you might want to look at is bringing that kick down. Maybe bringing it down by X number of dB is, I think, would get you closer to the feel of some of your favorite records. Maybe taking out a little bit of low end below this particular frequency would get you a little closer to your favorite records. Here's what I could do without you doing that. I think it sounds pretty good. Here's as far as I could get it. I think it's in a way better place and stands up to your favorite records even better. But if you want to take it even further, here's a little bit of feedback I'd give to you. So those are the benefits of mastering. Does it need mastering? You don't need anything, right? No track needs to be mastered. No track even needs to be mixed. No track even needs to be recorded. It's like, what's optimal? What's going to satisfy you? And for most people, most of the time, I'm going to suggest that getting another human set of ears on your record as the final QC, who's like almost a little bit your mixing coach, a little bit of the final sweetener, a little bit of the final quality control. That's the purpose of mastering. And what things like LANDR, SoundCloud's automatic mastering can do for you is just bring your level up to an appropriate loudness level within reason. And they don't really give you that much flexibility there. Like, what's an appropriate loudness level? Well, that depends. I've got a whole video on that. I did one with FabFilter recently where we looked at, like, how loud should you actually shoot for? Is it negative 14 LUFS like Spotify recommends? Probably not. Depending on the genre, it's probably louder. How much louder? It can be anywhere from negative 13 to like negative 6, depending on what genre you're in, could be common. So like, watch the right loudness level to sit next to your favorite tracks. Watch the right amount of brightness. Watch the right amount of low end. Watch the right amount of width. And hopefully you have a really competent human being working with you to decipher those things. That said, I'm not against the idea of these automatic mastering services. There are contexts in which they could totally be useful. I could totally imagine if you're out there doing library music or, like soundtrack music that's like royalty-free soundtrack music. You need to put out a lot of songs, a lot of cues. You can't afford to get every single one of them mastered. Then doing most of this on your side might make a lot of sense. But I've even worked with some clients in that realm where it's like, yeah, I get the economics of what you're doing. It makes sense not to have every cue you do get mastered by some human being who's going to charge you, $125, $150 or more, or a less high-level engineer who's going to charge you $50 or $60. That might not make sense for what you're doing. Economically, realistically, it doesn't make sense. But what you could do is take a couple of tracks and a couple different styles, send those to a mastering engineer, have him or her master those tracks, and then tell you exactly what they did. And I've done this for clients before. Like, hey, yeah, I know I'm only can master a few tracks for you. You can do the rest yourself, but at least we can go through this process where you can figure out what you're not hearing right in your environment, exactly what kind of changes I needed to make to exactly what frequencies to get it sitting better next to the things that you're going up against and competing with, giving you those few little mix tips of the things that I'm hearing that are maybe slightly off compared to the records that you're really shooting to sound as good or better than. And going through that process even once with that mix coach / mastering engineer, huge benefit. And then from there, run with it. I've even had one client ask me, hey, could you do everything in Isotope's Ozone, the entire master, so that I can open it up in my version of Isotope Ozone, see exactly what you did, and use that as like a preset starting point template for my other tracks so that I can master them myself. And I was like, yeah, totally. Why not? I could get why some mastering engineers wouldn't be comfortable doing that, but I'm totally comfortable doing that because there's a lot of people out there who need mastering, and I don't think we're going to run out of them anytime soon. And I see it as being a cool service that I can offer people. So that's something that's happened a few times. So I hope that's answered your question, Nick. Did you need to get your song mastered? Nothing needs to get mastered. But nothing needs to get mixed either. Nothing needs to get written. Nothing needs to get recorded. Would help you to get mastering In your case, and in the case of 90% or more of people, I think yes, in part because of the sweetening, the additional human perspective, the additional final QC on it. All of that stuff, I think, is tremendously valuable. And it depends, again, on the quality of the mix. With some people who are mixing at a super high level, I'll get mixes from people that sound awesome. They sound pretty much like mastered already and loud enough already from the moment they come in. And I barely do anything to them. And I'm just like ducking down below 100 hertz by half dB, or the opposite, bringing it up by like a dB. And like, that's it. That's all that I've done. And occasionally that'll happen. And occasionally some records, it'll be much more radical where there's significant dips and cuts and additional dynamic processing and sweetening and widening. It really depends on what it needs. And some tracks need mastering less because they're mixed so incredibly well. But even those people at that level often find, hey, if I can work with someone who I trust, who I know isn't going to overdo it and try to change the thing that I've done so well, but is just kind of going to like have my back and help me maybe sequence an entire album and make sure that each track that I, kind of mix to where it's almost mastered individually, that they all fit well next to each other so that I don't have one that is like hotter in the low end compared to the next one or vice versa. That's even helpful when people's mixes are like tremendous and they already sound like commercial releases, just like straight out of the DAW, which happens sometimes. But a lot, if not most of those people often want mastering, even if their mixes are still a level above, the quality of the guy who wrote in, who, again, Nick's mix, totally competent, totally excellent for where he is at in his journey. But there are people levels above that whose stuff sounds like super finished, who still feel like they benefit from that. Do you need it? You don't even need to be making music. So the answer is there's so few things in life you actually need. What do you need? You need oxygen, right? You need food. Is it going to be useful and helpful for you and worth it in many cases? I think so. Then again, you're listening to a podcast that's done by a mastering engineer. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But again, with that said, I'm a mastering engineer who will do things like say, there are some contexts where use LANDR, it's going to be fine, or I'll show you exactly what I did and you master stuff for yourself and go on and be merry. So I'm not the guy who's trying to drum up endless amounts of work. I already have as much work as I need. I just think this stuff is true and useful to know. I hope you believe that because I do. And thanks for staying tuned for this episode of the SonicScoop podcast. Hope you can relate to some of that stuff. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. Have you ever had something mastered and regretted it? There have been cases where I have. I'll link you to an episode about mastering sessions gone bad and how to avoid them. But have you ever not had something mastered and regretted it? That's an interesting case too. Let us know about that in the comments down below as well. Big thanks again to our sponsors this week. We've got FabFilter making some excellent effects, creative mixing effects, as well as awesome utilities, really great compressors, saturators, EQs, tremendous stuff. Check them out over at fabfilter.com. You can try out any of their stuff for free. Also, Soundtoys making some of those vibey, interesting, cool, creative effects out there. Check them out, soundtoys.com. Both those companies, you can try out anything they make for free. So go over to their websites and please do tell them we sent you. Also, big shout out to Jay-Z Microphones. I've been using one of their vintage 67 microphones on the podcast lately. I've done videos with their Black Hole, their BB29, their Amethyst, which I was using on the podcast a while back. Really rich and delicious sounding condenser. So great stuff. They even make my favorite pop filter, which I don't use on the podcast because I speak off axis in the podcast, so I don't even need a pop filter. But if you're looking for one, it's my favorite one. All right, check them out because you can get these mics for up to 60% off right now up until June 29th, and you can get free shipping on top of that with the discount code SonicScoop. I've also got more free stuff for you if you want it. I've got a intro to mastering workshop called Mastering 101 that you can get over at sonicscoop.com/mastering101. That's sonicscoop.com/mastering101. We go 30, 40 minutes deep into what is mastering, how do we go about it, what are the benefits, what are the best practices. If you want to get started doing it or just have someone master tracks for you, I think it's an invaluable free workshop. Check it out, sonicscoop.com/mastering101. If you want something on mixing, check out the habits of every great mixer, the 5 habits to be precise of every great mixer over at sonicscoop.com/mixhabits. That's sonicscoop.com/mixhabits, and learn what the best mixers on the planet are doing that you might not be doing. I've also got full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, now in its 2.0 iteration, definitely a good one, as well as Mastering Demystified, where I tell you everything I know about mastering. They come with a money-back guarantee. I think you're going to love them. And you can also just tune into the SonicScoop podcast if you want more free stuff. Hope to see you around. This has been Justin Coletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.